Hi, my name is Brian Jones, and today I'll be presenting the unfulfilled legacy of the civil rights and black power movements. Starting with the first slide, it talks about how the civil rights movement and the black power movement reveals that both achieved significant milestones. For instance, the racial wealth gap remained stark, with black families holding disproportionately less wealth than their white counterparts. These challenges demonstrate that the goals of the civil rights and black power movements, true equity and systematic transformation, are yet to be fully realized. Moving on to the next slide are the key achievements of the civil rights movement. First one was Brown versus Board of Education. Next one is Civil Rights Act of 1964. Then we have Voting Rights Act of 1965. And lastly, we have the 24th Amendment. Background on the Brown versus Board. This is a Supreme Court case declared racially segregation in public schools unconstitutional, overturning the separate but equal doctrine established in Plessy versus Ferguson. Civil Rights Act of 1964. This was a comprehensive legislation outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Moving on to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This act prohibited discriminatory voting practices such as literacy tests and poll taxes. And lastly, the 24th Amendment, Constitutional Amendment, abolished poll taxes in federal elections. Impact on these achievements were critical in breaking down racism and empowering black Americans to participate in society as equals under the law. Moving on, Black Power movement achievements. First one was self-discrimination, or the category self-discrimination. Under that is community control and political representation. Next category is economic justice, which falls beneath it is challenging economic inequality, black-owned businesses. And following up, we have control empowerment. Under that is reclaiming identity and education and awareness. Here we have lingering economic inequalities. Here's a graph showing the growing racial wealth divided. Now looking at it, despite the legislative progress achieved during the civil rights and black power movements. On the next slide, we have mass incarceration. Looking at the graph, it's a graph of Massachusetts incarceration rates by race and ethnicity in 2010. On our bulletins, we have persistent wealth gap. Under that, we have historical exclusions, basically centuries of economic exclusions, enslavement, sharecropping, discriminatory housing policies like redlining and restricted access loans created a significant wealth gap that persists today. Then we also have employment inequities. Black workers continue to face higher unemployment rates and wage disparities compared to their white counterparts, as we spoke on it earlier. Moving on to the next bulletin, we have housing inequalities. Legacy of reading. Although the Fair Housing Act of 1968 prohibited explicit racial discrimination in housing, its effects linger over time. Then after that, we have rising costs and gentrification. Giving background on that, in recent decades, gentrification has displaced black residents from historically black neighborhoods, further exacerbating economic insecurity. And lastly, we have limited access to capital, business ownerships. Black entrepreneurs continue to face challenges in accessing capital loans, hindering the growth of black-owned businesses. And then financial discrimination. Studies show that black applicants are more likely to be denied mortgages or face higher interest rates than white applicants, even with like similar credit profiles. On the next slide, we have education inequality. Looking at the two different pictures, one picture, they have a lot more resources or advanced resources than the picture above. They just have the school and then an outdoor court, while others have like electronics and stuff. Moving on to the next slide, we have political representation. The progress in representation for marginalized communities, particularly for African Americans, is notable. As you can see in the pictures, we have some black political leaders like Barack Obama, Frederick Douglass, and Martin Luther King. In the next slide, we have police brutality and systematic racism. Different bulletins we have Black Power movement. As far as like groups like the Black Panther Party address state violence directly by forming community patrols to monitor police actions and protect the black neighborhoods. Then we have Black Lives Matters. That's more of a moderate movement from like 2013 till now. BLM arose after the killing of Trayvon Martin and the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Michael Brown. Then we also have the civil rights era. In the 1950s and 60s, activists protested against the state violence in the form of police brutality, lynchings, and the use of the law enforcement to uphold segregation. Now we have cultural impact. Different pictures like Rosa Parks, Colin Kaepernick, see Martin Luther King, Michael Jackson, and Muhammad Ali. Those are all African American people that had really good impacts in the culture. Next slide, we have why the legacy feels unfulfilled. Looking at it, despite significant achievements such as the end of legal segregation, expanded voting rights, and greater representation in public life, many viewed the legacy of the civil rights and Black Power movements as incomplete due to persistent systematic inequalities. As you can see in the two different photos, there's two different time frames from different movements that happened in the past and modern day as well. Next, we have what does fulfillment look like? If you were to ask me that, I would say true racial equity and end of systematic racism. Looking at the bulletin points, first we have economic equity, which is eliminating the racial wealth gap through policies. Next, we have educational justice, which follows up ensuring that all children, regardless of their race and social economy status, have access to high quality, well-funded education. Then we have criminal justice reform, which is ending racial profiling, police violence, and mass incarceration. And then we have political representation, which is guaranteeing proportional representation in political offices. Following up, we have cultural recognition and equity, which is achieving widespread recognition and celebration of Black culture, history, and contributions. And lastly, we have healthcare or health equity, which is addressing health disparities by ensuring equal access to care, medical bias, and investing in preventative health measures. Next slide, we have call to action. Looking at these two different pictures, as you can see, it's in two different, I guess you can say, movements. Yeah. But advancing the goals of the civil rights and Black Power movements requires active participation from all of us. These movements laid the foundation for equality and justice, but their vision remains incomplete. Moving on to the last and final slide. Civil rights and black power movements laid the groundwork, but the fight for equality is ongoing. Looking at it, civil rights and black power movements fundamentally reshaped the social, political, and cultural landscape of the United States. Following up, they dismantled legal segregation, secured voting rights, and redefined the struggle for racial justice.